This is the inner teaching, not a new method for fixing life, but the end of fixing, the end of trying, the end of turning truth into a tool for changing pictures. And if only you will listen with your inner ear, you will feel why I tell you there are no deeper truths than this. And perhaps you will see that I am not offering you another exercise, but a release from exercises, from strain, from the long night of managing appearances. Do you see that? The whole treatment is this, and it is so simple the mind will try to step over it, so listen between the words and do not let it get stale. The whole treatment is one statement of truth, given once, given without an inch of wavering, and then silence. That is all. Speak truth once, then stop. Because every repetition after that, unless it rises spontaneously from realized presence, is fear disguised as devotion. It is the hypnotism still arguing its case. It is the senses still insisting they are authority, and you answer them with more words as if God needed help. Do you follow that? One statement, yes. But on what premise? On the only premise. There is only one presence and one power, one life, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one law. And besides this, there is no other. So what can be here except God and the effects of God? Nothing. And if you can acknowledge that once, not as a spell to cast over trouble, not as an incantation for getting rid of pain, but as recognition, as bowing before the infinite that already is, then the work of the practitioner is complete for that moment. In other words, the treatment is finished, and you enter the holy pause. Now the question comes, why does repetition become mental effort? And what replaces it when the effort stops? Listen, repetition is labor because the mind is still taking orders from sense testimony, from the sight of a condition, from the sound of bad news, from the feel of fear in the belly. And as long as you let those 5 reporters file their stories, you will be tempted to argue, to prop up truth with more truth, to add power to power. But there is no such thing as adding to the infinite. You cannot do it. And when you cease the argument, when you refuse to be drafted into mental combat, what takes over is silence. Not blankness, not vacancy, but living silence. The presence recognized, the inner hush in which truth reveals itself as your very consciousness. Do not expect answers to come in the noise of affirmations. They do not. They come when the senses are quiet, when the inner ear opens and you are content to be still. In other words, when you stop treating effects and let God be God. And then the answer appears, not because you forced it, but because realization is self-revealing. It is added, it is shown. It comes as peace first, as non-reaction next, and then as whatever form is needed. Do you see that? So the foundation for all that follows is this simple practice. And I say this with the authority of long years. Give one recognition. God alone is here. Then close the lips of the mind. Rest in the pause. Listen without strain. Let the silence do what effort never could. And do not let the ego complicate it. It is finished when you acknowledge the allness, and the rest is holy listening. Now let us be very clear and very honest, because this is the pivot on which the whole practice turns. The nature of error is summed up in one word: hypnotism. Not many errors, not grades of error, not this sin and that disease and some lack over here. No, there is only hypnotism appearing as pictures. And hypnotism has one characteristic that never changes. It cannot rest. It must agitate. It must argue. It must demand another statement and then another to hold the mask in place. Do you follow that? As long as you are hypnotized, you will work at truth. You will push and repeat and push again. And the moment you are dehypnotized, you will rest in truth, without 1 ounce of strain. Because there is no such thing as a power to oppose God. There isn't any. Why the compulsion to say it again and again? Listen, because you are still consulting sense testimony. You glance at the picture, you listen to the report, you feel the fear, and immediately you feel you must answer. So you affirm. And then you look back at the picture to see if it moved. And because the picture seems to stay, you answer again. And so the loop begins. Back and forth, picture and protest and picture. All of it reaction. All of it the mind trying to seize control by piling words upon words. In other words, it is still treating effects. The 5 reporters of the senses file their stories, and the newsroom of the mind keeps setting more type. And the paper never goes to press. Do you see that? This is not a question of your sincerity. I do not doubt that you love truth and wish to serve. But sincerity in hypnosis is still hypnosis. The issue is not devotion, but location. Where is awareness stationed? In God or in the picture? In the infinite or in the report of the senses? Do you follow that? The mind prefers the affirming loop because it feels like doing. It feels like safety, like control. But control of what? Control of a mirage. And the more you chase it, the hotter the desert becomes. 2 problems grow where one seemed to be, because you have dignified the picture with your attention, and then tried to rescue yourself with more sound. As long as you believe there are 2 powers, you will compulsively repeat. You will try to lend strength to the stronger statement. But there is no statement strong enough to make an unreality real, or to make reality more real. There is only the one recognition that God is the only presence and the only power. And then the refusal to argue with shadows. When you are dehypnotized, the truth you speak is not a brick you throw at appearances. It is a beholding that ends the need to throw. It is rest. It is non-reaction. And in that very non-reaction, the hypnosis loses its audience, and the screen goes blank. So mark this well, and do not let it get stale. Compulsive repetition is not spiritual power. It is the alarm bell telling you that sense testimony is still the authority, and the cure is not louder truth, but the shift of authority, away from the senses and into God. And then the lips of the mind close of themselves, because there is nothing to answer. Nothing to fix, nothing to fear, only God being God. Now let us place the premise so firmly that it stops the argument before it starts. There is only one presence and only one power, one life, and that life is God. One mind, and that mind is God. One soul, and that soul is God. One spirit, and that spirit is God. One law, and that law is God. And besides this, there is no other. So what can be here except God and the effects of God? Nothing. And if nothing else is here, then nothing else can act. Nothing else can threaten. Nothing else can need to be overcome. Do you see that? Therefore, hear me with your inner ear. There is no power in disease. There is no such thing as a power in lack. There is no power in fear. There isn't any. Not a little, not sometimes, not if you get the right formula. There is none. Because if God is the only power, there is no second power left over for a problem to use against you. In other words, the entire debate collapses when you stand on the one. And that is why one declaration is enough. You are not stacking timber to hold up the house. You are acknowledging the rock on which the house already rests. You are not loading ammunition to shoot at shadows. You are recognizing light. And when light is recognized, shadows have nothing to stand on. What then is this speaking truth once? Listen. It is not a human mind trying to persuade itself that it believes. It is not a louder tone or a stronger jaw or a tighter fist around a statement. It is a turning, a simple inward turning to what already is. It is recognition, not argument. It is the bowing of the whole sense of I under the fact of God's allness. And in that bow, the strain goes out of the thought because there is nothing left to win. You are no longer contestant. You are beholder. Say it once, yes, but say it as one who has no opponent. Say it as one who knows that omnipresence means no absence, that omnipotence means no rival. And then stop. Stop, because to add noise is to imply deficiency in the infinite, and there is none. Do you follow that? Why can one statement be final? Because truth is not accumulated by syllables. Truth is revealed as the false witness yields, and the false witness is the 5-sense report clamoring for you to answer back. But you do not answer back. You remove its tribunal by refusing to sit in that court. You retire into the inner room where the one is known, and there the verdict is already rendered: God alone. Repetition does not strengthen reality. Repetition usually strengthens the suggestion that there is something outside reality needing to be fixed, and the more you wrestle, the more you testify that the picture has stature, and it hasn't any. So your practice, right here, is the simplest in the world and the rarest to be lived. One recognition: God alone is here. And then the holy refusal to re-enter the argument. The lips of the mind close. The senses begin to quiet. You turn from the picture without resentment and without triumph. Just turn and abide and listen. If the picture tugs, do not answer it with words. Answer it with non-reaction, with the inner posture that says, I have spoken what is, and I will not lend reality to what is not. And in that stillness, you will feel the shift of authority from the senses to spirit, and the work is finished for that moment. Do you see that? Now we correct the method, and I want you to listen with your inner ear, because here is where sincere students most often lose the thread and then wonder why the picture keeps coming back in new costumes. You cannot cure a disease. There isn't any. Do you understand that? You cannot fix a lack. There isn't any. You cannot repair a broken relationship. There isn't any. There is only hypnotism appearing as these pictures, and the moment you move 1 inch toward treating the picture, you are already inside the mirage trying to scoop water off the hot road. And of course, the road stays dry because there never was water to begin with. In other words, when you use truth as a tool to change an effect, you have given the effect status. You have admitted 2 powers. And now the very truth you speak has been drafted to serve the hypnotism it was meant to dissolve. This is why 2 more symptoms so often grow where 1 seemed to be. And I say this after many years of practice. As long as your consciousness is reacting to an appearance, the root is untouched. So you pluck a leaf and another grows. You mend a rent and the fabric tears on the other side. You soothe one fear and a subtler fear rises. Because reaction feeds the suggestion, and suggestion must keep inventing forms to justify its claim to reality. Do you see that? The mind says, I will meet it with 3 stronger affirmations, and then with 7. And by that time, the case has become important. Your pulse has become a barometer for God. And the picture sits enthroned because you kneel to check whether your words are working. Affirmations used to change a body, a bank account, or a person are not spiritual treatment at all. They are material meta, effect-level manipulation, no different in principle from pills and lectures and scoldings. And I am not condemning any of that on its own level. I am saying only that it is not this practice. It is not dehypnotization. If your lips say God is all, while your eyes are measuring the lump, or your fingers are counting the bills, or your memory is rehearsing what they said and what you will say back, you are treating the picture. And the picture loves it because it keeps you in its courtroom, asking it for permission to be free. So what is the restraint of the practitioner? Hear it and hold it. Do not wrestle with the picture. Do not argue. Do not condemn yourself for seeing it. Simply recognize, ah yes, suggestion, hypnotism, not a power, not a condition, not a person. And return to God. Return to the One. Let the lips of the mind close. Let the senses be quieted. Refuse to lend your attention as oxygen to that fire, and you will feel the heat go down without a single pail of water. The work is not to alter the photograph, but to awaken from the darkroom. And awakening is not done with struggle. It is done with turning. Do you understand that we are not becoming passive? We are becoming unfooled. And there is a world of difference. Passivity sits in the desert and complains. Unfooledness recognizes mirage and keeps walking. Passivity refuses to act on the human scene, even when wisdom prompts a simple call or a quiet kindness. Unfooledness acts as led, but never to fix an appearance, only to express what God is being as your consciousness. Healing, supply, harmony, these are added as the spell thins, and the spell thins in exact proportion to your non-reaction, to your refusal to treat effects, to your steadfast recognition that there is only one presence and only one power, and that all else is theater without an audience. When the audience leaves, the play ends, and the way you leave is by speaking truth once, not to the stage, but to your own heart, and then entering the silence where the stage lights go out of themselves. Do you follow that? Let me give you 2 pictures, and if you will listen with your inner ear, you will see the whole practice in them, and you will not have to argue again. You are driving in the heat, and you see water on the road. Not a little, a glittering lake right there across the asphalt. And you may even find your throat tightening at the thought of a flooded pass. And if you are foolish, you stop and you begin to scoop, to kick, to push that water off the road. And the sweat comes, and the breath shortens, and still the lake sits there. And then you drive forward, and the lake drives forward with you. Do you follow that? But if in that instant it dawns, mirage, nothing here, just heat and light and the eye fooled. You do not scoop anymore. You do not argue anymore. You do not pray for winds to dry it. You recognize, and the work is finished. Not because you have removed water, there wasn't any, but because the suggestion lost its witness in you. Illusions are not defeated by effort against them. They vanish when their unreality is recognized. And if you can see that on the road, you can see it in your practice. Now the second picture. The hypnotist whispers, "There is a snake in that plant." And the subject turns and sees not a snake, a curl of leaf or a bit of shadow, but suggestion has gone in and the body obeys. Pupils dilate, stomach tightens, perspiration breaks, the mouth goes dry, the voice shrieks, And perhaps the chair is overturned in the rush to escape. The whole drama is real to the one under suggestion. But there is no snake. There isn't any. The entire storm of fear, of trembling, of pounding heart is sustained by one thing only: suggestion accepted as fact. Do you see that? If the subject tries to conquer the snake by shouting at it, by hurling words at the shadow, "Be gone! Be gone! Be gone!" nothing changes, because the effort is still inside the picture. The only cure is awakening. The only cure is dehypnotization. Turn on the light, see the plant as a plant, and the snake vanishes, because the snake was never present to begin with. Now bring this home. Repeating truth to batter down a condition is shouting at the snake, scooping at the mirage. It is labor because you are still granting the picture a kind of presence and then trying to chase it away with louder syllables. And the body will continue to register fear because the inner court has not been dismissed. Do you follow that? But one recognition, God alone, and the lips of the mind close, and you enter the holy pause. That is like the light going on in the room of consciousness, and the suggestion cannot live in that light. You do not remove a second power. There is none to remove. You see that there is no second power, and therefore nothing remains to oppose. Trace the mechanism so that you never forget it. Suggestion, then acceptance, then fear, then bodily reaction. This is the chain of hypnosis. Now the reversal. Recognition, then refusal, to argue, to protest, to react, then stillness, then freedom. In other words, the practice is not to perfect your human reaction, not to steady your breath while you stare at a phantom. The practice is to break the spell by shifting the faculty of knowing from the five senses to spiritual sense. The five reporters agitate because they thrive on pictures, but spiritual sense beholds what is, and in that beholding, the picture has no oxygen, and the play cannot go on without an audience. So when next you feel the tug to scoop at the road or to scold the snake, remember, speak truth once as recognition, and then be still, and the mirage will walk itself out of your sight, because there was nothing there to begin with. Do you see that? Now this silence I speak of, do not mistake it for a room without noise or a clock without ticking. No, silence in spiritual practice is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of consultation with the five physical senses. It is the end of judging by appearances. It is the drawing down of the curtain on the courtroom of sense testimony so that no witness is called and no verdict is sought. Do you see that? You may be in a busy street or in a quiet chapel. It makes no difference. For silence begins not outside, but inside, the moment the inner ear refuses the report of fear and the inner eye refuses the picture as authority. And awareness rests in God alone. You can never be dehypnotized while you are measuring the situation. As long as you are taking pulse from the wrist of the world, you are agreeing to the premise that the world has a pulse to give. And it hasn't any. There is only God, and the only way you can be dehypnotized is when the five senses are quiet, when you let them sit down and stop filing their stories, and you retire into the secret place of the Most High, that is not a geography at all, but your own consciousness, beholding God as the only presence and the only power. Do you follow that? The moment the senses are quiet, the spell loses its machinery. The projector has no crank. The film cannot move. And spiritual awareness, which has always been present, takes the seat of authority without effort. What is heard in that silence? Listen well. Not personal voices, not a parade of sentences, not the mind congratulating itself, but the still small voice. And by that, I mean an inner assurance that does not argue, a weightless conviction that simply is. It says nothing and says everything. It is peace without a reason. It is, I am here. And when that assurance dawns, there is no language necessary, because the question has departed with the questioner. You do not manufacture this voice. You do not bait it with promises. You do not demand it. You yield to it. Which is to say, you stop presenting your case, and you let God be God. How then to enter? Take it simply, and do not let it get stale. Speak truth once, God alone is here. And then stop. Stop speaking. Stop reaching. Let the hands in your lap be still. Let one natural breath come and go, and another. Not as a trick to calm the nerves, but as the sign that you are no longer checking the picture. You are no longer waiting for a change to justify your recognition. Do you see that? If the picture rushes back, it will try. Do not argue with it. Do not scold yourself. Simply say within, "Thank you, Father, that Thou art the only presence and the only power." And again, let the lips of the mind close. Let the senses grow quiet. Return to God as the only fact and rest. Understand that this silence is not doing nothing. It is the highest form of prayer because it yields the personal sense of power. It lays down the little engineer who must push and plan and manage, and it enthrones the one who already is the life, the mind, the law of all that is. In that yielding, the fever of reaction cools, the tyranny of checking dissolves, and realization begins to register as non-reaction first, and as guidance or harmony is needed, added, not produced by strain. Practice this doorway many times a day, not as repetition of words, but as repeated refusals to consult the senses, brief holy pauses in which you let God be God. And you will discover that dehypnotization is not a drama, but a gentle transfer of trust, out of appearances and into presence. And there is your freedom. Do you follow that? Now we come to the way the answer appears. And I must ask you to listen with your inner ear, because if you miss this, you will go back to pushing the river. The answer is not a picture changed first. The answer is realization. The answer is the shift of consciousness out of the court of sense testimony and into God as the only presence and the only power. And when that shift takes place, the pictures that need to alter for harmony's sake will alter as added things, not as produced things. Do you follow that? In other words, the answer is God realized, not conditions repaired. And from that realization, the forms consistent with God appear without your engineering. And that is why there is rest in this way. Expectancy, then, is not waiting for God to arrive. God is not traveling to your address. Omnipresence cannot commute. Expectancy is the poised stillness in which you let the noise subside so that you can recognize the government already here. You tune from the static to the station. You do not order the music to start. You quiet the dial and become aware that the broadcast has never ceased. Do you see that? After your one recognition, God alone is here. You do not lean forward to see if results have begun to drip from a spout. You lean back inside and let the senses go off duty. You listen, not with tension, but with that holy readiness in which you are willing to be shown rather than to make. Now hear the paradox that frees you. The less you try to make something happen, the more you witness what is included in realization. Because trying implies separation and lack, and there isn't any. Realization reveals inclusion, and inclusion needs no pushing to arrive. It is present as law. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Not manufactured by you, but added to you. added as natural expression of the substance which is God. One life, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one law. And every necessary form appears as the way that substance shows forth in your moment. Do you follow that? How does this feel in practice? Very simple, very quiet. You speak truth once and then you wait, not idly, not sleepily, but with a light on within. It is the waiting of a hostess who knows her guest is already in the house, not the pacing of one who doubts the train will come. And in that waiting, the inner assurance steals upon you, sometimes as wordless peace, sometimes as a clear nudge, sometimes as the dissolving of fear so complete that you no longer remember to check the picture. And then you find that what was needed is present. The call is made without debate. The door opens without knocking. The body drops its tension because the hypnotic premise has lost a believer. You did not do these things by strain. They were added to realization. They were included in the one you recognized. So take this as permission and as command. Stop striving while remaining spiritually effective, which is to say, refuse the courtroom of appearances. Dwell in God and listen, expectant yet unforced. Because the answer appears as consciousness yields. It is added to realization, not produced by strain. And every time you prove this in small ways, you are proving it for all ways. And the practice grows easier because the one is carrying the weight, and you are only beholding. Do you see that? Now let us bring this down to the single instant where practice is proved. The moment the report reaches you, the knock at the door, the pain that jumps, the letter with red ink, the voice raised in your kitchen. And I say to you, if only you will listen with your inner ear. Do not begin a campaign. Do not marshal verses. Do not tighten your jaw and go to war with a picture. Make one quiet recognition, and then stop. One sentence, not hurled, not dramatized, simply recognized as fact within your own being. God alone is here. There is only one presence and only one power. The life of God is the only life in this room. This is suggestion, not law. And then let the lips of the mind close and enter the silence we have spoken of. Do you follow that? The work is not to outshout the news, but to unseat it. And it is unseated when you refuse it a courtroom. You will be tempted, I know, to add 3 more assurances, and then 5, and then to check whether anything moved. But hear me. Healing takes place in proportion to your reaction to the appearance. As reaction goes down, realization comes up. And the thermometer of spirit rises precisely when the thermometer of fear is not consulted. Do you see that? So the practice at the point of impact is the reduction of reaction by God awareness, not by stoic grit, not by human denial, but by the holy fact that there is no second power and therefore nothing to fear, nothing to fix, nothing to oppose. Say within, there is only God, and let that be the end of speech for that moment. Suppose the phone carries a diagnosis. Do not bargain. Do not say, if you will fix this by Tuesday, I will meditate longer. Do not place God on your calendar. Omnipresence has no timetable. In other words, any demand for quick signs is still consulting sense testimony and making a clock your oracle. And you cannot be dehypnotized while watching a second hand. Do you see that? Return to silence until the inner assurance steals in, not always with words, usually as a weightless certainty that requires no proof. And when that assurance is present, you will discover that your hands are steady. Your breath is even. Your eye does not dart to the picture. And right there, the case has shifted from the senses to spirit. If it is a pain in the body, one sentence. God is the only life here, and stillness. If it is a bank notice, one sentence. There is one law, and it is God's abundance expressed, and stillness. If it is conflict, one sentence. There is one mind governing all being, and stillness. Do not then peep to see if the lake has dried. You know there was no water. Do not shout at the snake. You know there isn't any. Abide until the non-reaction is felt, and out of that non-reaction you will be led, perhaps to make a call, perhaps to rest, perhaps to speak a gentle word. But the action will be added to realization and not manufactured by fear. Keep this in sacred simplicity, because if you are careless, the mind will seize even this and turn it into a new ritual. 10 repetitions at the hour and a glance to see if it worked, and then you are back in the courtroom. Consistency is the safeguard. One recognition, holy silence, expectant listening. And if the picture tugs again, repeat the recognition once and return, not as technique, but as surrender. In our next step, I will show you how to guard this silence from becoming another method, so that it remains what it is, the government of God enthroned where reaction used to reign. Do you see that? Now I said to you, we must guard this silence from becoming another method. And here is the subtle trap. The human mind will take even holiness and turn it into a tool. It will sit down with a clock and say, I will be silent for 9 minutes, and if the pulse is still fast, I will add 3 more. It will close the eyes and then peep under the lid to see if the pain moved. It will fold the hands and in the same breath listen to the body and the bank and the calendar. And that is not silence. That is treatment conducted in whispers. That is hypnotism in a softer shoe. Do you see that? The counting of minutes, the scanning of symptoms, the watchfulness for signs. All of that is the mind at work on the picture. It is still consulting sense testimony and trying to coach God to hurry. And the very strain is the proof that you believe there are 2 powers, God and the condition, and there aren't any 2. There is only one presence and only one power. And if you admit an and, you are back in the courtroom. True silence is not tense waiting. It is not holding your breath until heaven blinks at you. True silence is surrender of personal will. It is the laying down of the little engineer who must fix and manage and report. It is resting, really resting in the fact that God is, that omnipresence cannot be absent, that omnipotence cannot be opposed, and therefore the picture, whatever name it wears, cannot be law, cannot be cause, cannot be power. Do you follow that? In that rest, there is no bargaining and no stopwatch. There is no listening for the creak of the door. There is only beholding. And in beholding, there is the end of argument. Because what could you argue with if there is only God? Now some of you write and say, I tried this and I felt worse. The fear got louder. My hands shook more. And I say to you gently, of course it protested. When the crutch of human effort is taken away, the fear shouts to get its nurse back. The habit cries, do something, say something, check something. And if you will listen with your inner ear, you will recognize this for what it is. Suggestion struggling to keep its audience. Stay with the inner turning. Do not fight the fear. Do not soothe it with extra syllables. Simply return with one recognition. God alone is here. And let the lips of the mind close again. Sit through the protest as you would sit through the tantrum of a child you love, without reacting, without rewarding, and you will feel the storm spend itself, because it has no law to sustain it. Do you see that? Do you understand now we are not mastering a method? We are yielding to reality. We are not perfecting a technique. We are letting God be God. And that is why silence fails only when it is used as a technique, because technique assumes a second presence to be manipulated, while surrender knows only one. So the watchword is purity. If you find yourself timing, drop the clock. If you find yourself scanning, shut the inner eyes to the picture. If you find yourself waiting for a sign, admit that waiting is still believing in an and return. One recognition, holy silence, expectant listening without strain. And if the tug returns, one recognition again. Not to make something happen, but to rest where all is already governed. For there is only one presence and only one power. And under that government, nothing else has standing. Do you follow that? So now let me leave you with the whole thing in one breath, so that you cannot be confused again if only you will listen with your inner ear. The treatment is this, and it is all of it, one truth spoken. God alone is here. There is only one presence and only one power. And then refusal to treat effects. Close the lips of the mind. Enter the silence. Sit in expectant listening without strain. Allow recognition to dawn. Feel the reaction melt into non-reaction. And watch as the added things appear of themselves, because realization carries its forms the way the sun carries its light. Do you follow that? You are not to push. You are not to plead. You are to recognize and be still. And in that stillness, the spell is broken, because there is no courtroom left for suggestion to argue in. Here is your daily discipline, and I am asking you to keep it so simple that you cannot turn it into ritual. For this day, and for each day that follows, choose one foundational truth and make it your single declaration. No new formulas, no catalog of words, one only. God is the only presence and the only power. Or, God is the only life here. And let that be enough. In the morning, before you greet any appearance, speak it once within yourself and then be quiet. And as the day moves, when the tug comes to fix or to check or to add a second sentence, recognize the tug as suggestion. Say your one truth once again, gently, and return to the silence. Do you see that? By evening, you will have discovered that power is not in many sentences. Power is in the one. And your peace will have been preserved not by resistance, but by non-reaction, born of God awareness. And take a weekly contemplation. Make it as faithful as your meals. Sit down and revisit the mirage and the snake until the reflex to fight the picture weakens and the reflex to return to God strengthens. See again the road that never held water and the plant that never held a serpent. Trace again the chain of suggestion, acceptance, fear, bodily reaction, and then walk it backward into recognition. Refusal to argue, stillness, freedom. Do you follow that? Do this not for entertainment, but for dehypnotization. Because every time you see clearly that you never scooped water and you never chased a snake, the senses loosen their claim to authority, and spiritual sense takes the seat. And that is healing. As you abide in this simplicity, you will find, quietly, almost shyly at first, that the most powerful prayer you know is wordless. And the most fruitful work you do is inward beholding. There is only God, and you are beholding God as all. No commentary necessary, no stopwatch running. Only that holy, weightless certainty, which is the still, small voice. Do you see that? Let your gauge shift. Stop counting demonstrations and begin noticing the ease of non-reaction. Stop measuring pictures and begin recognizing presence. And life will feel carried, because it is. So I leave you with this benediction assignment. Practice one truth and live in the pause. Speak it once. Refuse to treat effects. Enter the silence. Wait in expectancy. Let recognition flower. Let non-reaction be your proof. And let the added things take care of themselves because they must. Meditate and ponder this. Listen with your inner ear. Study well and never let this chapter get stale in you. Keep it fresh by living it. And each time you are tempted to add effort, return to the one and be still. Blessings and aloha.